Is the Earth tilting on its axis? This seems to be a question a lot of people have been posing lately, and one, to be fair, that does come up every few years, and nothing dramatic seems to come of it. People noticing that the sun is rising in the wrong place and setting in the wrong place in their local environment, and the time of the day seems now strange. Now, before we nail our colors to that mast, I want to talk about how I've been feeling about this. I've noticed probably for about 10 years that the sun changed and started setting in a different place where I live, and assumed it was just me making a mistake. I asked a few people and they said, yeah, I've noticed that too. But then it kind of vanishes in the terms of that discourse, and things change and life moves on. And I just assumed, yeah, well, maybe I was just making a mistake, or it's some other effect I'm not, making account for. But in this year particularly, a lot of people have been mentioning that the sun doesn't seem right. It seems to be in the wrong place. And it also seems in the Northern Hemisphere, say Europe and North America, it seems too high in the sky. People have reported to me who live in places like Canada and other places that, I just mentioned this casually on social media, and suddenly I was flooded with messages, things that were, copper fastened in their lifestyle for years. And one of them was driving to work or driving home from work. And you'd have on a certain road, and the sun would be setting or rising on that road during their commute, and would often be blinding them. That this year it's not there. It's either too high up in the sky or it hasn't risen just yet. Now, I've noticed this phenomenon too. So what is this all about? Well, remember during the Rona things, in the early days of the Rona Chronicles, I was saying stuff like, is this really a cover story for an asteroid? Is there really, it just can't be just about this. Is it a cover story for some kind of catastrophism or something? Now, around the time that happened, and we could move again, I was at a petrol station, or a gas station, as you Americans call it, on the N4 roundabout in Collooney at about 6 in the morning. No, it was later, 7. And I was getting some coffee. And I looked up at the moon, and the man in the moon was clearly on his side. Now, I've been watching the moon all my life. I'm an amateur astronomer. Well, I was when I was younger. I'm not so much now, but I know there's constellations. I know the night sky. The man in the moon was on its side. And there was no doubt about this. The only other time I saw the man on the moon on its side was when I was in Sri Lanka, which is just above the equator. The man on the moon was on its side because you're on the side, when you're on top of the earth, the man on the moon is looking straight at you. As you go to the side, it tilts because you're going around the curvature of the earth. And when you're in Australasia, he's upside down. It's one of the things you can prove that the earth is actually a globe. And when you're in Australia, you're on the bottom of the earth, looking at the man on the moon upside down. So the man on the moon was on his side. And I remember thinking, quite startled by it. I think I might have even mentioned it on a video here or on social media or whatever. And then since then, the man on the moon's been in the right place. I'm starting to think that was a Jungian synchronicity to tell me what was happening, like a vision that was going to happen. I really do think that that was probably like a vision, a synchronistic vision, kind of like the Jung and the scarab beetle type moment, a synchronicity that was so spectacular, it was telling me the truth of things. So, and it was right during the lockdown as well, which has added to the kind of flavor of everything. But it never crossed my mind that the earth might be really tilting until, to a serious degree, until recently. I have some friends who recommended a channel called Suspicious Observer. And we were talking about it sometimes having coffee on a Saturday morning. And Suspicious Observer's channel is very interesting. Now, it definitely comes from the catastrophism Velikovskian mindset that the tilt will happen rather quickly. When it does, there will be a sloshing-like effect, causing tsunamis that will race across the continents. And he gives lots of evidence for this, but I'm starting to think that may not be the case, and I'll tell you why. If the tilt happens slowly, you may get tsunamis in coastal regions, but you won't get these catastrophic tsunamis that you would get if there was a sudden tilt. Now, all indications are of the tilt happening. And there's another reason why you wouldn't get the sudden mass tsunamis, and I'll tell you that in a minute. This is actually a positive story in many ways, well, for some of us, not for those of you who are going to be moving to the North and South Poles. But roughly calculating, it seems to be going like, you watch a gyroscope, right? The Earth spins like a gyroscope, right? When a gyroscope starts to lose its momentum, it starts falling to the side, right? It doesn't turn upside down, it falls to the side, okay? The Earth's spin is as reported as being slowing down. Now, they're telling us a certain amount to slow it down. They'll never give you the real stories and things because they're always, just like when they hit that comet back in 2009, I think it was, that nearly wiped the Earth out. We were almost toast. They didn't tell us until it had already passed. And that's what made me think about that. There was something like that happening in the early days of the Rona lockdowns. So what will happen is the Earth will fall to its side, sort of like a 90-degree fall, right? And then begin spinning, and if spinning, spinning again. But what will correct itself? The spin will change as it's falling over. Hold an orange in your hand and tilt it sideways while you move your hand like this, and you'll notice that the spin will correct itself. If that's true, and my own indications of watching how the sun has been setting differently, and also the days are getting shorter. The days getting shorter here, and it's not that they're changing, they're definitely, the sun is not rising at the right time in the morning. In Ireland in summer, you get nearly 23 hours, 22, 21 hours of near bright daylight in this part of Ireland. At 6 o'clock this morning, it was still dark. It should be like bright. And the nights have been getting dark earlier. They haven't been, so you think, well, if it's changed or shifted, but we're still in the same position on the Earth, whatever, that it would just compensate, or the clocks were wrong. It would just no, the day is getting shorter. The days are absolutely getting shorter, and the sun has been observably higher in the sky, as well as a different color. It's bright blue now. And that has been like that for a long time. So if that's happening and we are tilting, or there's some other effect that I'm not aware of, I'm not saying I'm an expert here. I'm not saying this is a fact. I'm just throwing this is discussion we're all having. That would indicate that Ireland and this latitude is moving south towards equatorial regions. If the 90-degree hypothesis and the analogy of the gyroscope is true, Ireland will end up roughly, and Britain and Western Europe. Now remember, it goes to its side in roughly north of the equatorial region. So basically the same latitude that Hawaii is now. So imagine the same latitude that Hawaii is now, the UK and Ireland will be at that. But what's now the west coast of Ireland will be the south coast of Ireland. What's now the south coast of Ireland will be the east coast of Ireland. And where Dublin is will be on the north coast, and north of that will be the UK. Okay, but it'll be in roughly the position where the Hawaiian Islands are in terms of latitude as the Earth rotates. Okay. So Europe is not catastrophically damaged in any way. It moves into a similar climate that, say, Southeast Asia is in, Northern Africa. And so it actually goes, now this would explain why they're telling us about global warming. They're saying the world is going to heat up, and but it's not. And the reason why it's not heating up, I'll talk about in a minute. Well, immediately to us, and not immediately noticeable, and even getting colder, I'll explain in a minute. So wouldn't it be easier to tell the sheep will cause less panic that, now this is not the magnetic pole I'm talking about, this is the actual physical Earth on its axis. It'd be easier to tell the normies and cause less panic if you told them that it was global warming caused by man-made climate change than it is by the tilt of the Earth. That would drive them insane. They'd go bonkers. Look how they behaved over sniffles. Look, imagine how they behave over that. So who's going to go to the poles? Well, it's a tricky one to calculate, and you can only do like very basic experiments, which could be completely wrong. But I tilted the Earth 90 degrees on a globe and spun it. Basically, the parts of the world that will get very cold will be South America, Western and Eastern Africa, New Zealand. The Antarctic area will defrost. There'll be possible the Northern America will move, like where Canada is now, will move into a milder climate, but it will possibly suffer desiccation similar to the Sahara Desert, which will start growing again because it will be in a temperate region. It'll be in a similar region to where southern Australia is now, and places like Mongolia, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Japan will get very colder. It'll have a climate similar to all year round, by the way, to Greenland or maybe Iceland. And on the southern hemisphere, mostly, fortunately, it'll be mostly oceans where the actual poles will be. So the poles will move to mostly oceanographic areas. But that isn't said, some areas will get much colder, particularly sub-Saharan Africa and down towards South Africa along the laterally now, not from east to west, but north-south. So where, say, Nigeria is now, and particularly places like Spanish Sahara and south from there, Mali, these countries, Mauritania, they will suddenly have climates very similar to Siberia. Now, this might also explain the mass migration of Africans into Western Europe, almost like, people say they're being brought here, but they all seem to have walked north. And I'm starting, you makes you almost wonder if some kind of cosmic force has made them walk into the part of Europe that will survive and have a tropical climate going forward. It will be very bad for Japan, and it makes you wonder about declining birth rates there, as if nature switches off fertility. Japan may probably cease to exist as a nation, which is happening in terms of its birth rate anyway. There's other factors too. Now, regarding the sloshing effect of these massive tsunamis, that would happen if the Earth moved very quickly. But if it moved even fairly at a constant state, it wouldn't be a problem. Now, I'm not saying he didn't factor this in, but watching Suspicious Observer's videos, he tends to like the doom. He tends to like the catastrophism of Immanuel Velikovsky, I'm not putting that stuff down. Velikovsky is the one who found out that ancient people said the stars in the sky were in a different position and the planets were in different places. And that's exactly what observation from the Earth moving. So he said that basically as the Earth tilts, there'll be a sloshing effect and massive tsunamis will wash over right into the center of America, right into the center of Africa. They'll be so huge, like so many high waves. There's one thing he hasn't factored in, and that's atmospheric pressure. Atmospheric pressure will hold the sea. Now, if it happened quickly, it would happen. But if it's happening slowly and appears to be happening slowly, it might only produce tsunamis in coastal regions. Because the Earth's atmosphere weighs trillions and trillions and trillions of tons. Do you remember your periodic table from school? You had radon in the basement because it's a heavier atomic weight, a heavier gas. Gases they have weights. And lighter ones like ozone, they float in the upper atmosphere. And all the other ones, hydrogen, helium, carbon, lots of gases escape the Earth's pull every year because they drift off into space. If the Earth was not had that atmosphere, and you had even a slow tilt, you would have the massive tsunamis. Now, when I was deep studying the Apollo technical documents, one of the most interesting things was the sloshing tanks. Because of this huge size of the Saturn V rocket, they were greatly concerned about the sloshing of the fuel, which is mostly oxygen, liquid oxygen and kerosene, bouncing around inside the fuel tanks so like you have a full fuel tank and it takes off, and as it's burning fuel, it drops and drops and drops down. Space increases above the fuel, so that allows sloshing. It jumps up and down as the rocket is vibrating, and it could take the rocket off course. So what they did was they developed these anti-sloshing chambers, and you can actually see them in action as one of the Apollo missions, they put a camera inside the fuel tank as it was taken off and filmed the anti-sloshing dampers, which were like concentric rings inside the tank. And what they did was they created an atmospheric buffer. As the fuel decreased, the atmospheres above increased. And so it kind of pressed down on the fuel, stopping it from doing that. Well, that's what will happen to the Earth it's one of those things the flat earthers say. How come if the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, all I have to do is fly a helicopter into the air and wait, and an hour later I'll have moved 1,000 miles of Earth have moved underneath me? No, the atmosphere is moving with the Earth because the atmosphere weighs trillions and trillions of tons. So that's why the helicopter is moving with the atmosphere. That's why that theory doesn't work. So that's what that colossal weight of the atmosphere rushing down on the Earth, which the masses felt planetary wise. You don't feel it as an individual because you're just a small speck. It's just a small speck on the planet's surface. But the continents feel it, and the oceans especially feel it. Atmospheric pressures. This is why that's such a big part of meteorology in shipping forecasts. Like the BBC fishing forecasts, 76 millibars and rising. Fastnet, 24 millibars and falling. Atmospheric pressure determines the way the Earth's the sea's roughness. So high pressure means a calmer sea. Low pressure equals a rougher sea. The same thing. So the Earth's atmosphere will compensate for the sloshing effect, provided the Earth moves slowly. Okay, which it appears to be doing. Now, again, this is all just pulled out of my ass in terms of anecdote. I don't have any specifics. I'm just an observer. I watch auguries, I watch synchronicities, I observe human behavior, and it could explain a lot of the insanity going on in, say, Northern European in the West, which is Northern European when you think about it, and Australia, which are, they're above, and because our will change the most. So the madness has taken place here. Things like duality is breaking down and all that other stuff. So, and another thing too is I have an analog watch. Okay. Now, one of the reasons I have an analog watch is because I became too dependent on the digital clock on my phone. Now, all the digital clocks, the one on this computer here, the one on your phone, wherever you're watching this, or on your iPad, they're all synced to a universal time clock that's caused by satellites that orbit the Earth. I think they belong to the US Navy. And what they do is because they're up in space, they have to compensate for Einstein's theory of relativity. So they go around the Earth and they keep time stable on the Earth. So time would always be the same if you're using a digital clock. But my analog watch now, it's not a high-end Rolex, but it's a decent enough watch, Japanese-made watch. It loses a minute a month now. It never did that before. So if I exactly synchronize the watch, and it's a synchronizable watch, like a military type one, and I push the knob in at the exact stroke of midnight on the 1st of May, on the 1st of June, it's lost a minute. Now that could be the mechanism. I don't know. I'm just throwing stuff out there. So I think it's highly probable that the Earth could be tilting. It's been recorded in folklore and other things. We do know that the magnetic pole is drifting. Now, that's a very strange way of putting it, isn't it? The magnetic pole is drifting. No, maybe the magnetic pole is staying in the same place, and we're being gaslighted away from knowing that the Earth is actually drifting. The magnetic pole is, now think about, that's a heavy one to think about, that the magnetic pole is staying in the same place it always was, but it's actually the planet that's drifting. And you have them telling us that the magnetic pole is drifting instead. So interesting times ahead. I'd absolutely love to know what you think of all this. Have you noticed things like the sun rising in the wrong place, the days being the wrong, everything? And also lots of human behavior, from sudden migration to many other things. And migration from areas where Western Africa, which is going to be in the Arctic, suddenly fertility switched off. Where? Japan, which is going to be in the polar regions. And China's really screwed. And because like central China will basically be where the North Pole is now. And that means that like all the major cities on the east coast of China, they'll all be basically frozen. they'll be much higher latitude than places like Thunder Bay in Canada. And that's pretty up there. Now, humans can survive in these places. The Russians live in large cities in Siberia and they manage quite well. And so it is doable, but it's not doable if you're not used to it. And it happens over the course of, say, 20 or 30 years. Now, the good news is now we're moving to an equatorial, near equatorial region. So, you know, a tropical region we're moving to. Why is it suddenly cold this summer? I have an answer for that one. The Gulf Stream, it's moved. If we're moving, the Gulf Stream will go haywire and it will miss us or just stop or anything like that. And I think this cold we're having now may just be temporary. We could suddenly have very massive heating up very quickly. Now, the media will tell us that that heating is all caused by man-made global warming. And the meat don't look at the stars. The sheeple, the same ones that put themselves in pens at concerts during the lockdowns, they don't look at the moon, they don't look at the stars, they don't look at the sky, they don't notice the sunrise. And you know, they're very easy to gaslight. You give them a small cliche word and they'll stop thinking of climate change and they'll stop thinking about everything else. Far right, they stop thinking about everything else. They just use the cliche as a kind of a comfort safety blanket for it, so you don't have to intellectually think about anything. So yeah, deep shit. Let's continue the conversation because I tell you something, it's definitely got my interest.